It was early Monday morning in Savannah, and the light outside still had that soft gray tint that comes before the sun fully commits. Hi, I'm Lena. 2 days before my wedding, I found a note on my parents' kitchen counter. 7 words. Wedding's off. Expect a call from my lawyer. No name, no explanation, just silence. Then I found out the venue, the dress, and even the playlist were still being used, just not for me. They gave everything I planned to someone else. And while they clapped at a wedding built on lies, they had no idea the daughter they erased was already 3 steps ahead. I had a box of cake samples in the passenger seat, my keys tucked in the crook of my fingers, and a checklist scribbled in blue ink on the back of a grocery receipt. That day was supposed to be about finalizing centerpieces and getting my mother's opinion on frosting textures. I had no reason to expect anything different. I parked where I always did, under the pecan tree at the side of my parents' house. The air smelled like pine mulch and leftover summer, and the front steps creaked the same way they had since I was in middle school. I let myself in through the side door. It was unlocked as usual. The house was quiet, not Sunday morning kind of quiet, not coffee percolating and radio humming kind of quiet, just still. The kind that presses on your chest. There was no television on in the background, no faint clicking of my mother's teacup on its saucer, no footsteps upstairs. I stepped into the kitchen, still balancing the box in one arm, and that's when I saw it. Right there on the marble counter, where she usually left her lists and coupons and sticky notes with cheerful hearts. But this wasn't handwritten. This was printed, centered, clean font. Wedding's off. Expect a call from my lawyer. I didn't drop the box. I didn't gasp or even blink right away. My body just stood there like it had slipped out of time. At the bottom, in smaller font like a signature or a disclaimer, Karen Hartley. I stared at it, scanning it again, as if I had misread the words, as if somehow they would rearrange themselves and say something else, something less final. I picked it up. The paper was warm from the sun through the kitchen window, just slightly curled at the corners. It smelled like citrus, like the candle my mom always lit when she was expecting guests. It felt like a joke or a test or both. But no one came out from behind the corner yelling surprise. There were no footsteps or nervous laughter or explanations following me down the hall. Just silence. I tucked the paper into my purse, walked to the refrigerator, and left the cake samples on the second shelf next to a pitcher of sweet tea. Then I grabbed the grocery receipt from my coat pocket, crossed off the word tasting with a single pen stroke, and walked back out the door. Outside, the street was just waking up. A man jogged by with a golden retriever, and a school bus groaned to a stop 3 houses down. I stood next to my car for a long minute before I got in, staring at the lawn where my father used to set up the plastic snowman every Christmas. I remembered helping him stake it down once when I was 10 and the ground was still damp from overnight rain. He let me hold the hammer. I drove home with the windows down, even though the breeze was a little too cold for it. The air helped. I didn't play music. I didn't call Noah. I didn't text anyone. Back in my apartment, I set my keys on the hook and placed my purse gently on the counter. Then I went to the window and stood there, arms crossed, watching a boy across the street ride his bike in figure eights. He reminded me of a childhood neighbor we used to play hide and seek with after dinner, back before anything was complicated. I spent the rest of the afternoon cleaning. Not in a frantic way, just moving from room to room with a cloth and a spray bottle, wiping down surfaces that didn't need wiping. I scrubbed behind the stove. I rearranged my bookshelves by height instead of genre. I vacuumed the inside of the coat closet. When the sun dipped low and the apartment turned golden, I made a cup of chamomile tea, the kind I usually saved for nights when I couldn't sleep. I carried it to the kitchen table and sat, just me and the fading light. Then I opened the leather-bound notebook I kept tucked in the drawer beside the refrigerator. The one I only wrote in when I didn't know who else to talk to. I flipped past pages filled with seating, charts, vendor, contact numbers, dress-fitting notes. I stopped on a blank one and smoothed it flat with the palm of my hand. And then I wrote just one sentence. Silence is also an answer. I closed the notebook and left it open on the table, the pen resting across the top. The apartment smelled like lemon and dust. Somewhere outside, a car door slammed and someone laughed. I didn't look up. I sat still, hands folded in my lap, the note from my sister still tucked inside my purse waiting. So was I. I didn't show up to the nonprofit that Monday. The office manager texted to check on me. I left it unread. Instead, I spent the morning trimming the dead ends off my lavender. It was an unusually crisp morning for early September in Portland. The kind of air that feels thin and blue and forgets to carry sound. I kept waiting for a bird to break the silence. Nothing did. I didn't call Noah. Didn't text my maid of honor, Serena. I left my phone on silent face down on the kitchen counter next to the mug I never finished. The mint tea had long gone cold. I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I just walked the garden path barefoot, watered the thyme twice without realizing it, and scribbled the same phrase in my journal over and over. Everything's already been said. By mid-afternoon, I started a small load of laundry. Not the dress. That still hung untouched in the back of my closet in a garment bag I couldn't bring myself to unzip. Instead, it was socks, some dish towels, and the pajama set my sister Karen had gifted me last Christmas. I didn't realize until I pulled it from the dryer and folded it that the initials embroidered on the sleeve read KH. She had monogrammed it for herself, then gave it to me last minute still in its gift wrap from a different brand. Classic Karen. By the second day, I found myself cataloging absurd details. The shape of the teabag stain on my counter looked like a sideways heart. The kitchen clock was ticking off beat. The lilies by the fence had bloomed too early. Maybe they were confused by the cold front, or maybe they just knew the wedding wasn't happening anymore. I reread the note Karen had left on my kitchen island. Wedding's off. Expect a call from my lawyer. The handwriting was too neat to be written in anger. Too calm. I imagined her placing it there, deliberately checking for smudges before walking out. She had taken her things. Her coffee mug. Her curling iron. A single tube of lip gloss that I had once let her borrow and never got back. The spare key I kept in the junk drawer was gone too. I waited 48 hours. It wasn't a strategy, it just happened. Then sometime late Tuesday afternoon, I finally turned on my phone. The screen lit up with notifications. Missed calls from Serena, 3 unread messages from Noah, 1 from our caterer, and a flagged email at the very top. It was from Magnolia Bridal Atelier. Subject line: gown pickup complete. The email was brief. Just a digital receipt and an image attachment. I tapped it open. There she was. Karen. Standing on the pedestal of the boutique's mirrored fitting room, arms raised like a dancer mid-spin. Wearing the exact gown I had custom ordered 6 months ago. The one I had worked overtime shifts to pay for. The dress I had cried over in that very room. And there she was, beaming in it. No apologies, no hesitation, just hers now. I stared for a long moment before flipping to Instagram. The reel autoplayed. Karen twirled under soft lighting, the lace skirt catching every shimmer from the chandelier. Same boutique. Same stylist, standing in the background clapping like this was the highlight of her week. The caption in soft gold script: fall wedding dreams come true, number, Hartley wedding. The comments were worse: so elegant, absolute vision. Can't wait for the big day. And then one from our aunt, Claire: proud of you, sweet girl. You deserve everything. I didn't scroll any further. My hand was steady when I set the phone down. I walked to the sink, poured the cold tea down the drain, and washed the mug with a little more force than needed. Back in the garden, the sky had shifted into that pre-dusk gray, the kind that seems to hold its breath before deciding whether to rain. I stood by the bird feeder and refilled it. Still no birds. I wasn't sure if I was angry. I didn't feel the burn of betrayal the way I thought I would. It was something deeper. Heavier. Like watching someone slowly tear up a blueprint of a home you hadn't built yet, but could already see perfectly in your mind. The engagement. The wedding. The first dance. The idea of Noah looking at me with that mix of awe and comfort only he could carry in his eyes. The quiet life after all the noise. Gone. Not burned down. Just rewritten. I took out my journal again and flipped to a fresh page. I wrote her name in the middle. Karen Hartley. Then underneath there will be a reply. I didn't know what form it would take yet, not a letter. Not a confrontation. But it was coming. I could feel it like the electricity in the air right before a storm. The quiet didn't mean surrender. Sometimes silence is just the inhale before the siren. And somewhere in that pause, I heard the first bird call of the day. I opened my laptop with a strange sense of calm, like the moment before the pain catches up to the injury. The screen lit up and I clicked on the link. Karen had texted, no message, just the link. A portfolio of photos loaded. At first, I didn't understand what I was looking at. Then my chest tightened. They were standing on the terrace at Alder Cove Vineyards. The golden hour sun hit just right on the wooden arch I'd picked out months ago. The band in the background looked familiar. I squinted. It was the same quartet I'd hired for my own wedding. The bouquet in Karen's hands, white peonies with sprigs of lavender. Exactly the mix I'd chosen after 3 vendor consultations. The plated appetizer in one photo, beet salad with goat cheese and honey glaze, was the exact sample I'd approved in my tasting menu. No part of this was a coincidence. I clicked back into the family email account, the one we'd used for shared wedding planning, logistics, and vendor communications. My password didn't work. Tried again and again. Locked out. I sat there still, as if my body needed a moment to catch up. Then I opened my files. My invoices, my contracts, my saved drafts of thank you notes and table arrangements. I wasn't looking for closure. I was looking for proof that I hadn't imagined any of it. That I hadn't somehow hallucinated planning a wedding over the past year. I pulled up a folder labeled Finalized Vendors. There they were: the gown invoice from Marianne's Bridal Atelier, $8,000. Payment to Alder Cove, $15,000 even. Flower deposit, $3,200. And one line that stopped my heart mid-beat. Pear Willow Glen Nonprofit Inc. Authorized signatory Karen Hartley. I stared at the line for so long my eyes blurred. My nonprofit. My name used to be listed there. I'd co-founded Willow Glen 6 years ago. It started as a weekend tutoring program for low-income students in Detroit, then expanded to include after-school STEM workshops and career mentorship. I'd poured everything into it. Nights. Weekends. My own savings. And apparently my wedding fund too. I scrolled down. Another document. A transfer of primary representation. The form was dated 2 months ago. Karen had appointed herself executive director in my absence, citing indefinite medical leave on my behalf. My hands shook as I searched deeper. Attached was a letter from a lawyer. Gordon Ellis. I recognized the firm. Midtown old money, full of glossy men in fitted suits who called each other by last name only. The letter confirmed the nonprofit account had been reallocated with full board support for discretionary operational costs, including employee wellness incentives. In short, they'd used my own organization's funds to pay for Karen's wedding, a wedding that had been mine. And nobody told me. Not the board, not the assistant director I'd mentored, not the accountant. I wasn't even listed on the internal email chain anymore. I leaned back in my chair, arms limp, and stared at the ceiling like it could explain how things had come this far. Not only had they hijacked my plans, they'd erased my name entirely, replaced it with hers, and moved on like I'd never been part of the story. I picked up my phone, scrolled to Karen's name, thumb hovering over the call button. But what was there to say? That she'd stolen my venue, my vendors, my bouquet, my date. That she'd walked in behind my back and rewritten the script I'd spent months crafting. She'd probably spin it the way she always did. That I'd given up my date when I left town. That I hadn't returned calls. That the funds were ours because I'd used the nonprofit card for the first deposit. And that she only stepped in to keep things from falling apart. She always had a way of making theft sound like duty. Instead of calling her, I reopened the photos. One caught my attention. It was a candid. Karen, mid-laugh, veil trailing behind her, standing next to the same arch I had dreamed of walking under. The man beside her, my ex-fiancé, was smiling at her like he never had at me. Or maybe he had and I'd just convinced myself otherwise. In that moment, it hit me. This wasn't just about the wedding, it was about being erased. About becoming a placeholder that no one intended to keep. About being told I was the backbone, then watching them move just fine without me. My phone buzzed again. A calendar notification. Reminder. Dress fitting at 10 a.m. I stared at it, the irony too loud to ignore. Outside my window, the city was waking up. People walking dogs, buses, rumbling by coffee carts setting up on corners. I closed the laptop, slowly stood up, and let the silence settle over me like a second skin. I opened a new folder on my desktop and named it Restitution. Not revenge, not justice. Just restitution. Something about that word felt clean, measured. I didn't need to torch the house down. I just needed to make sure they couldn't lock me out of it again. For the next 5 hours, I moved in complete silence. I pulled every email thread that mentioned the venue, the flower contracts, the catering bills, and the suit fittings. I exported spreadsheets, invoices, digital receipts, and timelines. I screenshotted text messages, backed it all up to a hard drive, then to the cloud. Then I did something I hadn't done in weeks. I went through every shared account my name had ever been attached to, joint accounts with my parents, the estate fund my grandmother left behind, and the trust account I helped manage after Grandpa Bill passed. What I found made my stomach knot. There were withdrawals I hadn't made. Service fees I didn't recognize. Transfers marked with strings of numbers instead of notes. And then the most damning detail: my name was no longer listed as a cosigner on the primary trust account. That had been changed 3 days ago. I stared at the screen, blinking slowly, then reached for my phone and dialed the local branch manager at Pacific Heritage Bank. His name was Michael Tran. He'd known our family since we moved to Paso Robles when I was 11. He used to slide butterscotch candies across the counter to me and ask how school was going. When he answered, his voice was warm, familiar. I asked if I could come in and speak to him privately. He said he had an opening at 11. I told him I'd be there in 20. It was only a 12-minute drive, but I got there in 9. Michael looked older now, more salt than pepper in his hair. But his eyes still held the same blend of kindness and calculation that made him perfect for his job. We shook hands, and he motioned for me to follow him into his office. Once the door was closed, I told him everything. Not the family drama, not the fight at the winery or the postponed wedding, just the facts. That I'd noticed changes on a trust account I used to co-manage. That my name had been removed. That I had concerns about unauthorized access. He listened quietly, then typed something into his computer. His brows pinched together almost instantly. "Lena," he said carefully, "did you authorize a change of signer on the Hartley Family Trust last Thursday?" "No," I said. "I haven't touched that account since March." He turned the monitor slightly toward me. A digital form was pulled up with a new signature line. Underneath it read, "Thomas G. Hartley. My father." The penmanship looked almost identical. Almost. "That signature doesn't match the one on file," Michael said softly. He opened another tab and brought up a comparison. The old signature had a clean loop in the H. The new one had a jagged flick at the end. It was close, but not right. "I want to freeze the account," I said. "Now, before anything else moves." Michael nodded. "I'll need to file a fraud inquiry. This might take a few days. But yes, I can freeze the account immediately." "Do you want me to notify your father?" "Not yet," I said. "Let him think he got away with it." I left the bank with a printout in my hand and a new kind of clarity settling in my bones. This wasn't about a wedding anymore. It wasn't about a dress or a dinner party or who got to post first on Instagram. This was a plan. A calculated move to erase me from more than just a ceremony. From my family's financial legacy. From everything I helped build. Back at home, I sat down and opened a blank page in the restitution folder. I started a timeline. Not of events, of decisions. The first time I paid for the insurance premiums so Mom and Dad wouldn't lose the vineyard after the frost. The year I gave up my graduate program so I could come home and help Dad recover after his accident. The months I handled payroll for Sabrina's boutique while she was finding herself in Milan. The nights I stayed up, emailing suppliers, negotiating contracts, finalizing orders, all unpaid, all unrecognized. I wasn't keeping score. But if they were going to erase my signature, I had every right to write my name back in with interest. I emailed my attorney friend in Monterey, Adrian Mays, and attached the documents. Asked for a quiet consultation. Then I shut my laptop and walked outside into the fading light. The air smelled like eucalyptus and wet grass. For the first time in weeks, I felt my shoulders drop. This wasn't revenge, it was reclamation. And I wasn't asking for permission. My phone lit up with a call from an unknown number just after 10 that night. I almost didn't answer. Something in me hesitated, thumb hovering over the screen like it might burn me. But I did. I answered. And the voice on the other end sent a shiver so deep down my spine I forgot to breathe. It was Colton. "Hey, Lena." His voice was slow, uncertain, like he'd rehearsed what to say but forgot it all the second I picked up. I didn't say anything. My mouth opened, but nothing came out. I heard about the wedding being canceled. And I heard some things. About back then. And I need to explain. My throat tightened. I walked to the window, pulled the curtain aside, and stared into the dark yard where the shadows of the oak trees flickered in the porch light. Colton cleared his throat. "You probably don't want to hear from me. And I wouldn't blame you. But I didn't leave because I stopped loving you." I still didn't speak. He let out a shaky breath. "Your mom sent a letter. To my department chair at the university. Back when I got that assistant instructor position, she said you were emotionally unstable. That you needed serious therapy. That it was dangerous for someone like you to be in a relationship. That I'd be hurting you more by staying." My hand clenched around the phone. My nails dug into my palm. "She said if I really cared about you, the best thing I could do was walk away. Let you heal." He was quiet a long moment. And I believed her. I didn't even think to question it. I thought I was doing the right thing. But then I saw the post about the wedding. The comments. What your sister said. What your parents said. It made me wonder if I'd been wrong all along. I let the silence stretch. It wasn't that I had nothing to say, it was that there were too many words and none of them would have mattered. Not tonight. Not in this storm of truth pouring out too late. She mailed it on letterhead, Lena. Like it was official. She wrote that she was acting on your behalf. That you were too fragile to make decisions for yourself. She signed it with deep concern and love. I swallowed. My voice finally came out quiet but firm. "Thank you for telling me." There was a pause. "I'm sorry, I know." Another pause. "I never stopped thinking about you. You deserve to know that." I nodded to myself. Then, still staring out into the yard, I ended the call. I sat down at the dining table with the notebook I hadn't touched in a week. I opened to a blank page and wrote slowly, carefully, like carving something permanent into stone. They never tried to break me with fists. They did it with gentle words written in my name. I stared at the sentence for a while. Then I flipped back a few pages, scanned old entries from years ago. The ones where I questioned myself. Where I wondered if I was unstable. Too intense, too difficult to love. Pages soaked with apologies I never needed to write. I saw it now. The pattern. The slow erosion. Not a landslide, not a storm, but a constant drip of doubt placed carefully by the people who claimed to love me most. My mother's voice echoed in my head from years ago. "You've always been too much, too sensitive, too dramatic," and yet it was never my drama. It was their script. I just played the part they handed me. A light knock on the door startled me. I glanced at the time. It was almost 11. I froze. No one should have been at the door that late. I tiptoed to the peephole. It was Naomi. I opened the door. She didn't say anything. Just handed me a manila envelope. Then looked at me, eyes searching my face like she was asking permission to say more. Inside, she said softly, "You'll want to read it." I took it. Stepped aside. She walked in, sat on the edge of the couch like she wasn't sure she had the right to be there. I opened the envelope. Inside were printouts. Screenshots of emails. Handwritten notes. A copy of the letter my mother had sent Colton's university. And more. Letters to former employers. Notes to friends I hadn't heard from in years. All of them casting doubt, all signed in ways that implied they came from me or from people trying to protect me. She kept records of everything. Naomi said quietly, "And I only found this because your sister was careless. She left a drawer unlocked in the guest room. I wasn't snooping. I was looking for a charger. But when I saw your name, I believed you. But I didn't know how bad it really was. My hands trembled. I flipped through the pages slowly, each one cutting deeper than the last. Naomi placed a hand on mine. You don't have to go through this alone anymore. I looked at her. For the first time in years, I felt the tears rise not from pain but from release. I'm going to need a lawyer, I whispered. Naomi nodded. I already made a call. I didn't know what you'd want to do. But I figured, you'd want someone who isn't afraid of your mother. I let out a small laugh. It came out broken, soft, but real. The silence after that was comforting. She stayed while I made tea. We didn't talk much more. There wasn't much left to say. Later that night, I stood at the mirror in my bedroom holding one of the letters. And I realized something. They didn't ruin my life in one big moment. They chipped away at it with kindness that reeked of control. And now, for the first time in my life, I wasn't asking for understanding or permission. I was drawing a line. And I wasn't crossing it back. I didn't even hear the knock when the envelope slid under my door. It was cream-colored, heavy stock. My name typed in small bold letters across the front. No return address. Inside, a cease and desist letter from a boutique law firm out of Chicago. Karen's new fiancé was listed as partner. That tracked. I read the first line 3 times before it even registered. You are hereby instructed to immediately cease all forms of communication and content, digital or verbal, that constitute defamation, harassment, or unlawful disclosure of private information regarding our client, Miss Karen Hensley. My hands didn't shake. But something inside me did. I hadn't posted a single word. I hadn't spoken her name to anyone outside my closest circle. Not even when I saw the engagement announcement. Not even when I found out they were using my canceled wedding venue repackaged as theirs. Not even when my own mother told guests I was taking a break to get my mental health sorted, and yet they were scared. The letter was dated 3 days ago. Meaning it was prepared before Karen sent her little handwritten note calling off the wedding. I folded the letter slowly. Set it down on the coffee table beside my now cold mug of coffee. Outside, the wind rattled the pine trees. I sat perfectly still. Then my phone buzzed. It was an email from the executive director of Horizon Works, the nonprofit I'd spent 6 years helping to build. I'd been volunteering full-time for over a year now, helping to develop their Pacific Northwest youth program. Just last month, we'd locked in our biggest donor to date. A private trust with enough capital to fund our programming through next spring. The subject line made my stomach drop. Funding on hold, urgent review needed. I opened the email. It was brief. 3 lines, no greeting, no signature. Following recent allegations regarding the leadership team's credibility and public representation, we are pausing all financial disbursement effective immediately. We appreciate your understanding. I clicked the forwarded message attached. It was a PDF. 2 pages. Anonymously submitted. Allegations of past emotional instability. Unverified claims that I had misused donor funds to support personal travel. Screenshots of Instagram posts that weren't even mine, captioned to look like I had mocked Karen's wedding. None of it was true. None of it had evidence. But it looked polished. Real enough for someone to hesitate. I felt my throat tighten. Karen had filed her preemptive strike. Or maybe my mother had. Or both. I wouldn't put it past them. This was a family that believed in controlling the narrative. And if they couldn't paint me as bitter, they'd try unstable. I stood up, walked to the window, and stared out across the driveway. The snow hadn't fallen yet, but the gray sky promised it soon would. I could smell the cold coming. There was a framed photo on the side table. Me 3 years ago, holding a student's hand at a graduation ceremony. My face was turned toward the sun mid-laugh. I remembered feeling full that day. Whole, they wanted to strip that version of me away. I walked back to the table, opened my laptop, and started typing. Not a post. Not a public statement, just a draft, just a file for me. I titled it Timeline. Not a retaliation. Just a record. I listed everything. Dates, emails, screenshots, conversations I'd journaled from memory. I pulled financial records and contracts. I organized photos from the event that had sparked the rift in the first place, my engagement party, the one where Karen had accidentally worn the exact same dress I had chosen for the rehearsal dinner. The one where she cried when I asked her to change. I saved it all to a private drive. Then I closed the laptop and sat back. No one needs to yell when they already have the mic. That was the thing Karen didn't understand. I hadn't said a word. I hadn't released a single sentence into the world. But still they scrambled. They threatened. They tried to bury the story before I had even told it. I leaned forward and picked up the cease and desist again. Folded it twice more. Dropped it into the bottom drawer of the desk beside an old photo strip of me and Karen at a theme park years ago. Back when we still pretended we liked each other. I wasn't going to reply. I wasn't going to rant online. But I also wasn't going to stay quiet forever. Let them scramble. Let them guess. I had drawn my line. And they had already crossed it. I texted Mom the next morning. Nothing elaborate. Just, "Are you okay?" I waited an hour. Then another. No reply. I called. Straight to voicemail. I tried Julia. It rang twice before going silent. Then nothing. I sat on the floor of my apartment with cold coffee in one hand and the same playlist playing on loop since the night of the fight. I wasn't sure if I was waiting for someone to say sorry or just to prove to myself they wouldn't. Around noon, I checked Facebook mostly out of habit. And there it was. A post on Mom's timeline. Public no tags but dressed in passive aggression so sharp I could feel it through the screen. Some people raise children who grow into strong women. Others raise daughters who mistake boundaries for betrayal and throw tantrums when asked to grow up. Pray for families broken by pride, not love. No name. No photo. But the comments said enough. You did your best, Julia. Some kids never learn to be grateful. I remember when she got kicked out of that internship. Not surprised she's pulling something like this. The worst part wasn't what people thought. It was knowing Mom let them think it. Chose to let them. I stared at the screen for a full minute before I logged out. I didn't cry, just sat there. Let it numb me. Later that day, I reached out to Ashley. We hadn't talked in over a year, but she'd always been someone I could count on back in college. I thought maybe if anyone would meet for coffee just to talk, it'd be her. She replied within the hour. Hey Lena, I've been following what's going on. I need to be honest with you. Years ago, your mom helped remove my cousin's scholarship at Candler. It almost cost her the degree. I didn't say anything then, but I just can't get involved. I hope you understand. I'm sorry. I did understand. I understood too well. I wrote back. Thanks for your honesty. I really do get it. Take care. Then I deleted the thread. Not out of anger, just acceptance. There's a kind of silence that creeps in not all at once, but in pieces. One door closes. One friend steps back. One message goes unanswered. Then suddenly you look around and realize you're the only one left in the room. I didn't try to reach out to anyone else, not because I didn't need someone, but because I knew the story had already been written in everyone's minds, and I wasn't the author. I stopped checking social media after that. The urge was still there like a phantom limb, but every time I gave in it left a mark. A photo of Julia in her robe at the bridal suite. Mom's comment about how proud she was of her strong, grounded daughter. A snapshot of the ring. Of the floral mock-up. Of a life I was no longer invited to witness. I started taking walks again. Early ones before the city fully woke up. I passed the same bakery on 5th, the one we used to go to after church. I went in once. The girl behind the counter smiled and said they still had lemon scones. I said I'd come back and never did. I spent hours some days just sitting in my building's stairwell halfway between floors. There was no reason. It just felt like a space that didn't belong to anyone else. One night I wrote in my journal I wasn't abandoned all at once. They just rearranged the house slowly until there was no room left for me to stand. Then I closed the book and left it on the kitchen counter. That felt like enough. A few days later, I got a letter in the mail. No return address. The handwriting was Julia's. Inside was a printed copy of her wedding postponement email. We regret to inform you that the wedding between Julia Benson and Matthew Klein has been postponed until further notice. No explanation. No apology. But there was a sticky note folded inside. Wedding's off. Expect a call from my lawyer. That was it. No punctuation. No signature. I stared at the note for a long time. My first thought was that it wasn't even meant for me. Maybe she'd copied it and sent the wrong version. Maybe this was a threat. Or a mistake. But then again, Julia didn't do mistakes. I didn't react. Not out loud. I didn't call anyone. I didn't post. I didn't scream. I didn't even sigh. I just placed the note on my fridge with a plain silver magnet and went to make dinner. Because I knew something they didn't. They thought silence meant surrender. But mine was the sound of a storm gathering. And it had just found its center. The message came while I was rinsing strawberries in the kitchen. Unknown number. Seattle area code. I almost ignored it. But something in my chest tightened the way it does when you sense a storm before it breaks. I wiped my hands on a dish towel and answered. A woman's voice, gentle but precise. Hi, is this Lena Hart? Yes, I said slowly. My name is Eleanor Pike. I used to be the finance officer for Northwest Future Families. I believe we need to talk. I walked straight to the living room, sat down, and turned on the voice memo app on my phone. Eleanor didn't waste time. I saw your name mentioned in some threads online. I didn't want to believe it at first, but then I remembered things. Details that never sat right. She told me how my parents joined the nonprofits board 5 years ago, all smiles and donation pledges. How they quickly took over the fundraising arm and rerouted large grants into a private trust registered under L. Hart Trust, claiming it was meant for outreach scholarships. I never created any trust. They used your name for credibility, Eleanor said. For press, for paperwork. You were the success story on every pitch deck. Except, I don't think you ever saw a cent. My hands curled tight, my breathing slowed to a crawl. They forged my signature. I asked it quietly, almost afraid of the answer. I'm afraid so. There were transfers I flagged, but I was told by your mother that you had personally approved them. I kept records. And after I left, I archived copies of everything just in case. The system logs too. Someone tried deleting them later, but I had backups. Eleanor offered to email the entire file set, scans of the original grant letters, the fake authorization forms, the deleted logs recovered from the server. And one more thing, she added. I also filed a notarized affidavit when I resigned. I never felt good about leaving quietly. But now, if you're pursuing justice, I want to help. After we hung up, I sat frozen for a full 10 minutes. The silence in my apartment pulsed like a heartbeat. Then I opened my laptop. Eleanor's email arrived within minutes with attachments stacked like bricks. I clicked through page after page, each one a needle. The signature on the trust papers wasn't mine, but it was close enough to fool most. The date next to it, August 27th. My birthday. I leaned back and stared at the ceiling. They used the day I was born to steal in my name. There was a draft email I had written weeks ago but never sent. Addressed to the nonprofit board, asking about the status of the funds I had once raised. I had felt it wasn't my place to press. That maybe I had misunderstood. That maybe silence was safer. Now I pressed send. Then I called Ethan. He picked up on the second ring. Lena, everything okay? Number, but it's about to be. I told him everything. The trust, the documents, Eleanor. His voice changed mid-call. From comfort to strategy. We need to get those notarized copies certified again. And then, we can take this to the Attorney General's office. This is wire fraud, Lena. Identity theft. Misappropriation of nonprofit funds. Possibly tax evasion. He paused. This isn't just about you anymore. This could bring them all down. I looked at the mess on my coffee table. Scattered strawberries, open laptop. Eleanor's files glowing like a lighthouse in the dark. And then I remembered something. The folder I had once seen Dad lock away in his study marked L discretionary. At the time, I'd thought it was about my trust fund. But now the meaning had shifted. They didn't just steal money. They rewrote my existence on paper. A message notification popped up. It was from Camila. She had texted only once before months ago. This time she wrote, "Hey, I heard from Eleanor. I'm sorry, truly. Let me know if I can help." I stared at the message. Camila had been part of the same world that erased me, and yet now maybe she saw me again. But this wasn't about apologies anymore. I drafted a note to Eleanor thanking her and asking if she'd be willing to speak under oath should it come to that. She replied within 5 minutes. Absolutely. I've waited years for someone to call this what it is. I copied all files to a secure drive and backed them up in 3 locations. Then I sat back feeling the weight of it all settle. This wasn't just a betrayal. It was an erasure signed in my name masked by birthday candles and trust fund lies. They didn't just replace me in the wedding photos, they signed over pieces of my life with a pen I never held. And for the first time in years, I wasn't afraid of what came next. The envelope was cream thick and stamped with a gold wax seal that had been crushed slightly like whoever delivered it wanted to leave a mark. It was sitting dead center on my porch table when I opened the door that morning, resting next to the rosemary plant I forgot to water. There was no return address, but I knew exactly who it was from the moment I saw my name written in that aggressive cursive. Inside in crisp legal formatting was a formal notice Karen had filed a civil complaint against me for emotional distress, defamation, and misappropriation of event funds. Her lawyer's name sat at the bottom, printed in bold, as if daring me to take it seriously. For a full 30 seconds, I didn't move. Then I laughed. Not because it was funny, because it was pathetic. I placed the notice flat on the kitchen counter, then walked to my desk, opened the drawer labeled restitution, and pulled out the folder I'd quietly assembled over the last 2 months. Receipts, bank statements, screenshots, emails. The notarized affidavit from our former accountant detailing exactly when Karen had rerouted venue deposits into a private account. My own itemized journal with dates, timestamps, and copies of every legal consultation I'd attended since Karen first tried to lock me out of my own wedding planning fund. By noon, my attorney Jenna had the folder scanned and sent to the court with a formal counterclaim. When the preliminary hearing date came through 2 days later, Jenna called me with her usual dry tone. Well, she said they've just stepped into a hornet's nest wearing perfume and open-toe shoes. The judge reviewed the filing and approved the motion for an independent audit. Karen's complaint was not dismissed outright, but the tide had turned. My counterclaim was strong enough to warrant serious review. A court-appointed forensic accountant would now be combing through every transaction tied to the wedding fund. Karen didn't stay quiet for long. That evening, she posted a carefully worded essay on social media. It opened with a black and white photo of her staring out a window, hand on her stomach like some forlorn heroine in a soap opera. The caption read, "Some people thrive on drama. Some of us are just trying to heal and move on. I won't be bullied into silence." Hundreds of likes. Dozens of sympathetic comments. I recognized the usernames. Her Pilates instructor. The woman who hosted her baby shower. A few distant cousins who had always preferred her anyway. She never mentioned my name. But she didn't have to. The implications were clear. I was the aggressor. The jealous sister. The unstable one who had turned a family event into a legal circus. I didn't respond. I didn't even click like or view the comments. Instead, I waited until the weekend and made a single post of my own. No caption. Just a clean scan of a vendor invoice showing the payment trail leading directly into Karen's personal account. No explanations. No angry words. Just the facts. Then I posted another. An email thread between Karen and the florist where she altered the original budget and claimed full authority over decisions even while I was still officially listed as the bride. A week passed, then 2. I shared a new document every few days. Never more than 1 at a time. Never with commentary. Just quiet truth. My followers didn't explode. I didn't go viral, but the people who needed to see it saw it. Karen, meanwhile, doubled down. Another post. This time with the caption, "Real family supports each other even through misunderstandings. Some people never learn that." By the third post, people started asking questions in her comment section. Someone asked why the wedding planner's email was different from what she'd said. Another asked about the missing refund from the rental company. Karen deleted the questions. But the silence around her posts grew thicker. And I kept living. I went to work. I picked up fresh hydrangeas for the living room. I walked past the wedding dress hanging in the back of my closet and didn't feel the usual burn in my throat. Jenna called with updates every few days. The audit was moving faster than expected. Apparently, the accountant had flagged several large cash transfers during the wedding planning timeline, none of which could be matched with actual vendors. One Friday afternoon, as I was returning home from the market, Jenna sent me a screenshot. Karen's legal team had quietly requested a settlement discussion. It wasn't an admission of guilt, but it was a sign. That weekend, Karen posted nothing. And on Monday morning, for the first time in a long time, I drank my coffee on the front porch without checking my phone for fallout. The sunlight hit the porch steps like it had nothing to worry about, unlike me. I'd barely finished half my cup when my phone buzzed. At first, I thought it might be Mark or someone from the legal team. But it was Ashley. Ashley, who hadn't spoken to me since the fundraiser. Her name alone made my chest tighten. I opened the message. "Hey, Lena. I saw everything. Just wanted to say I believe you. But I can't comment or anything. You understand, right?" I stared at the screen for a moment, my thumb hovering. There was no malice in her words, just fear. The kind of fear that made people freeze instead of stand. I typed back, "Thanks," and left it at that. By noon, I had 5 more messages like it. Old colleagues, neighbors, even an editor I once worked with on a charity campaign. All whispering support but too afraid to stand beside me in the light. One said, "You're brave, but I have kids. I can't afford backlash." I wanted to scream. Not because they didn't post or speak out, but because they acted like silence was neutral. It wasn't. Silence had always been their most effective weapon. Not just in my family, but in the circles they moved in. The glossy elite didn't have to cover things up when everyone else just looked away. The call from Victor came around 2:30. I didn't recognize the number at first. When I picked up, his voice was calm. Too calm. "Lena," he said, like we were still on cordial terms. "You've made your point. But I think it's time to consider the bigger picture." I leaned back in my chair. "What bigger picture?" "The one where your job is to polish their image while they bury the truth." Victor sighed. "You're smart. You know how this works. The news cycle moves fast. People get tired. The public's attention span is short. You keep pushing and it might just make you look bitter. Not brave. There's a difference. So you're calling to tell me to be quiet. I'm calling to tell you that if you stop now, it all dies down faster. No further damage, no drawn-out spectacle. Just let it go." He paused, "Then maybe, just maybe, there's room for something else later on." I smiled without humor, "So I can trade my silence for a seat back at the table. Is that it?" His pause told me everything. "Goodbye, Victor." I ended the call. I sat there staring at the blank wall across from my desk. He wasn't wrong about the news cycle. The comments under the articles were already shifting. Less outrage, more questions. Some saying maybe I had a grudge. Maybe I was overreacting. Maybe this was about money or attention. A few defended me, but they were drowned out. I turned off the laptop. I couldn't live inside that noise today. Instead, I walked outside. The air was crisp and carried that subtle shift that hinted fall was near. I passed the neighbor's kids drawing with sidewalk chalk. One of them smiled at me and waved. I waved back. It reminded me there were still small pieces of the world untouched by manipulation and PR statements. At the market, a woman in the produce aisle paused beside me. She looked familiar, but I couldn't place her. She leaned in and whispered, "I just wanted to say, thank you." Then she walked off before I could even reply. I stood there holding a bag of apples, stunned. It was the first real voice of support in person I'd heard all week. Back home, Mark had left me a folder on the kitchen counter. Inside were printed court dates, preliminary filings, a deposition timeline. I flipped through them slowly. Each page felt heavier than the last. This wasn't just a family spat anymore. This was legal warfare. Later that evening, I sat on the floor of my living room surrounded by documents and photos. I picked up an old photo from my grandmother's birthday. Everyone smiling. Everyone pretending. Back then I still believed love would be enough to hold us together. Now I knew better. I didn't want to go viral. I didn't want revenge. I wanted truth. On record. In the court's hands. I didn't need a trending hashtag. I needed a judgment. Something real. Something binding. As the sun dipped behind the trees and shadows crept across the floor, I gathered the papers into one neat stack and placed them in a folder. They thought I needed to win the crowd. But all I'd ever needed was to win the case. The courthouse hallway felt colder than it should have in mid-July. Maybe it was the silence after the gavel fell. Maybe it was what the silence meant. I walked out first, not turning back, not needing to. The judge had spoken. The financial transfers were declared procedurally improper, violating both internal trust protocols and fiduciary standards. I was granted temporary management of the disputed assets. And the court had ordered the initiation of a civil trust review. That alone would keep them busy for years. Behind me, I heard nothing. No footsteps, no arguments. Karen had bolted from the courtroom the second the ruling came down. No dramatic exit, no gasp, just gone. Julia, though, had stayed a little longer. I could feel her watching me as I packed up the documents and handed them to Malcolm. She didn't speak. Not a word. Her eyes weren't sharp anymore, just blank. Like the fire had gone out of her. I didn't know what to make of that, and honestly, I didn't care. Outside, the sky was as gray as wet cement and a light drizzle had started. Reporters hovered like seagulls waiting for scraps, but Malcolm moved ahead and cleared a path. I didn't stop. Not to answer questions, not to pose. I wasn't here to be a symbol or a story. I was here to reclaim what was mine. We reached the car. Ethan was already waiting. He stepped out the moment he saw me and held the door open, his hand resting lightly on the frame like he was grounding himself. I slid into the backseat without a word. He followed. Malcolm leaned in through the open window before we pulled away. "We'll meet next week," he said. "The trust audit will be messy, but you're on firm ground now. They can't touch anything without court approval going forward." I nodded. "Thanks, Malcolm." He gave me a small smile, one that didn't quite reach his eyes, then stepped back into the rain. Ethan reached for my hand once we were on the road. I let him. His palm was warm and steady. I watched the city blur past the window. The buildings, the people, the red light we didn't run. All of it felt like noise from another life. "Do you feel it yet?" he asked quietly. "Feel what?" "That it's over." I turned my head. "Not quite. Not yet. But I don't feel lost anymore." He squeezed my hand. "We didn't go home, not yet." We drove aimlessly for a while. Past the river, across the bridges, through neighborhoods I hadn't seen in years. Eventually, we ended up by the marina. The water was choppy, restless, just like my thoughts. I got out and walked to the edge of the dock. The wind pushed at my coat, tugged at my hair. I closed my eyes and let it. For a long time I stood there just breathing. In. Out. The weight of the case, the betrayal, the lies, the courtroom, none of it felt as heavy now. Not because it had disappeared, but because I'd carried it to the finish line. I hadn't collapsed. I hadn't begged. Behind me, Ethan joined in silence. He didn't ask questions. He didn't need to. "You were incredible in there," he said, after a moment. "Calm. Clear. Strong." I didn't feel strong. I felt finished. Like a thread that had finally been cut loose. I turned back toward him, my voice low. "They'll keep fighting, won't they? Maybe. But it won't matter anymore. You took back the narrative. And the power." I nodded slowly. Not to agree. Just to acknowledge the truth in that. Back at the condo, the lights were still off when we arrived. I walked in first, letting the quiet swallow me. I didn't turn on the lamps. I liked the way the evening light filtered in through the blind, soft and unsure. In the kitchen, a stack of mail waited on the counter. I sifted through it absently. Bills. Junk. A letter from the city planning office. And then a white envelope, no return address, just my name in bold ink. I paused. Tore it open. Inside was a single sheet of paper, typed. Simple. I'm sorry. That's all it said. No signature, no clues. But I knew. I didn't need handwriting analysis or a DNA test. It was Julia. Karen wouldn't have bothered, and Thomas had gone entirely quiet after the trial began. I stared at the page. Not moved. Not angry, just tired. I folded the note in half and slid it into the drawer next to the fridge. Not to save it. Not to forgive her. Just to put it somewhere that wasn't inside me anymore. Ethan watched me from the hallway, leaning against the doorframe. You okay? I nodded. What now? Now we wait. We keep moving, we live. And when the audit is done, we rebuild. Not from scratch, from truth. He crossed the room and kissed my forehead. Let me make dinner, he said softly. You sit, you've earned that much. I let him. And for the first time in years, I didn't feel like I had to earn my own breath. I didn't have to defend my space or prove I belonged. I didn't smile. But I sat down at the table, lifted a glass of water, and drank like it was my first. Because, in some ways, it was. 2 weeks after that final dinner, an envelope arrived in the mail. No return address. No note inside, just a crisp check for $35,000. The memo line read one word: reimbursement. I stared at it for a full minute. Not a word of apology. Not even an acknowledgement of what had been taken or what had been done to me. Just money. A transaction. Their attempt at closure on their own terms. I didn't deposit it. Instead, I took it downtown to a custom framer. I picked out a walnut frame, had them mount the check under museum glass, and asked for an engraving plate beneath it. 3 words in small, neat font. Proof. Not apology. It now sits on my desk just to the right of my laptop. Every time I see it, I'm reminded that I was never crazy. I was never too sensitive. I was never the problem. The silence I kept for so long wasn't weakness. It was waiting. Waiting for my own voice to be strong enough to carry. Waiting for the facts to catch up with the truth. Waiting to stop surviving and start building. And now I am. I registered my firm 3 days after the check came. It had been in the works for months, but that envelope was the final push I needed. The name is simple, honest, and very intentional. Wells, and Hartley Wells was my grandmother's maiden name. The woman who taught me to make statements without raising my voice. Hartley is my mother's mother. A woman who died with too many secrets and too few choices. Together, those names stand for something. We focus on legal advocacy for women who've been pushed out of businesses they built, silenced in rooms they helped create, or excluded from the very systems they kept afloat. We help them get their names back on deeds, patents, contracts, and sometimes even doorways. We help them be seen. The homepage of our website opens with a single sentence, one I wrote late at night with tears still drying on my cheek. Not everyone who stays quiet is weak. Some are just gathering enough proof to never need to scream. It's been 3 months now. I've spoken on 2 panels, signed 4 clients, and declined 1 very lucrative case from a man who thought feminism was just a brand. And last week, a reporter reached out asking if I'd be willing to talk about family law and succession issues on a podcast. I said yes. But not because I want to be famous, not even because I want revenge. Because somewhere there's a woman sitting alone in her apartment right now, doubting her memory, questioning her worth, rereading an email from someone who told her she was lucky to be tolerated. She doesn't know it yet, but her silence has value. Her story has power. And her day will come. Just like mine did. The strange part is I don't even feel angry anymore. That sharp edge I carried for years has dulled into something quieter. Not quite peace, maybe, but purpose. Even Camila hasn't tried to contact me again. After that night, she went radio silent. I heard through someone else that her luxury line got dropped by 2 boutiques and her name's no longer on the foundation's website. The woman who once bragged about her table settings now refuses to attend events where she can't control the seating chart. My parents haven't called either. But they did send that check. And honestly, that felt louder than any phone call. It was their version of "we know you were right." Or maybe just "we're scared of what else you might say." Doesn't matter, because I'm not writing for them anymore. I'm writing for women who were told they weren't strategic enough, weren't resilient enough, weren't tough enough to sit at the table they built. I'm writing for myself. For the version of me who sat at that family barbecue trying to swallow her shame with sparkling water and a forced smile. And I'm writing for you. If you've ever been called dramatic just for telling the truth. If you've ever been told to be quiet, to be grateful, to be more like someone else. If you've ever been edited out of your own life story, leave a 1-inch the comments or tell me where you're watching from. This is the part where the silence ends. Where we write the next chapter ourselves. No more ghostwriters. Just us.